In this section, we are going to go through review questions from Module 1. Module 1 was all around identity.
So let's look at the first question. Your users want to sign into devices, apps, and services from anywhere. They want to sign in using an organizational work or school account instead of a personal account. So that's a key word. The users want to use work or school account. You must ensure corporate assets are protected and that devices meet standards for security and compliance. Specifically, you need to be able to enable or disable a device. What should you do? While you provide users ability to use the work or school account, at the same time, you need to protect the devices for standard security and compliance. So which option would you pick from the below? Is it enable the device in Azure Active Directory? No. Just by enabling the device in Azure AD, it is not going to allow any of these functionality to work. Is it connect the device to Azure AD? No. Just by connecting, you are not able to get all these functionality as well. Registering the device, again, is not going to allow you to manage and remove these devices whenever you want, or enable or disable. So the correct answer is join the device to Azure AD. Joining a device is an extension to registering a device. This means it provides you with all the benefits of registering a device, like able to enable or disable the device. In addition, it also changes the local state of a device. Changing the local state enables your users to sign into a device using an organizational work or school account instead of a personal account. So by registering a device, you get an ability to enable or disable a device. But by joining a device to Azure AD, this gives you an ability to make sure that your users can sign in with their work or school account. Let's look at the second question. Your network contains an Active Directory Domain Services or ADDS domain named conterso.com and an Azure Active Directory domain named conterso.onmicrosoft.com. Azure AD Connect is installed and Active Directory Federation Service is configured. So you have the ADFS setup as well. Password write back is enabled. You need to monitor synchronization events generated by Azure AD Connect. Select one. So the question is, you enable password write back. Now you need to monitor the synchronization events generated by the Azure AD Connect. So which option below will be able to use to monitor the events generated by your Azure AD Connect? Is it launch the synchronization service manager and edit the properties of the connector? You can do that for so many other activities. So you can definitely log into your server and modify your synchronization service to change parameters and the ways you want to modify your synchronization manager. So that's not the right answer. Is it by configuring the authentication caching? Definitely not. That's not even relevant. Is it by deploying a domain controller for conterso.com on a virtual machine in conterso.onmicrosoft.com tenant? Absolutely rubbish answer. So just by deploying a domain controller is not going to resolve the problem what we are trying to solve. So the right answer is install Azure AD Connect Health. Azure AD Connect Health is a feature that will monitor on-premises ADDS identities and provide alerts. This requires an agent on each server being monitored. So let's look at question number 3. Identify 3 differences from the following list between Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory Domain Services. And you need to select 3 answers. So we need to go through each of the statements and find out the main 3 differences between Azure AD and Azure AD Domain Services. So let's read the first one. Azure AD uses HTTP and HTTPS communication, which is correct. So the option is right. Azure AD uses Kerberos authentication, which is wrong. Azure AD does not use Kerberos authentication. Azure AD uses the modern authentication. Third option, there are no organizational units or group policies in Azure AD, which is absolutely right. So Azure AD doesn't have OU or GPOs. OUs and GPOs are part of on-premises domain controller or ADDS. Next statement is Azure AD includes federation services. Absolutely. So Azure AD is the one you can use for federation services as well. The last statement is Azure AD can be queried through LDAP, which is completely wrong. You can only use ADDS to query LDAP. So let me tell you some of the several characters of Azure AD that it makes different from ADDS. So Azure AD is primarily an identity solution, and it is designed for internet-based application by using HTTP and HTTPS communication. Because Azure AD is HTTP and HTTPS based, it cannot be queried through LDAP. Instead, Azure AD uses REST API over HTTP and HTTPS. Azure AD users and groups are created in a flat structure, and there are no organizational units or group policies, while Azure AD includes federation services and many third-party services such as Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. And ADDS supports federation as well. You would like to add a user who has Microsoft account to your subscription. Which type of user account is this? You need to select one answer. So is it a cloud identity? No. Is it a directory synchronized identity? Absolutely not. Directory synchronized identities are synchronized from on-prem to the cloud. Cloud identity is a user who is born in the cloud. Is it a provider identity? I don't know what does that mean. Is it a hosted identity? Not. Definitely not. So the correct answer is guest user. Guest users are users added to your Azure AD as part of your third-party services like Microsoft or Google. Let's look at the question number 5. You are configuring self-service password reset. Which of the following is not a validation method? You need to select one answer out of it. So we are trying to find which one is not going to be a validation method. Email notification is definitely a validation mechanism. Along with text, which is sent to your user's phone and mobile, is again a verification process. And the last one, a set of security questions, is also part of the verification process. The only option which is not a validation method is paging service. Right. So let's look at the last question of this module. You are assigning Azure AD roles. Which role will allow the user to manage all the groups in your team's tenant and be able to assign other administrative roles? So you're looking for an Azure AD role which has an ability to assign additional administrative roles to someone within your organization. So it is definitely not user administrator, because user administrators can only manage users. Security administrators can view and manipulate reports related to security and modify some security related groups. Password administrator have ability to manage passwords for the users. So the correct answer is global administrator. Global administrator is the only admin role you can use to manage groups across tenant and assign other administrative roles.
In this section, we are going to go through questions from Module 2, which is around governance and compliance.
Let's look at the first question. You need to target policies and review spend budgets across several subscriptions you manage. What should you do? And you can only select one answer from below. So the key word here is you need to target policies and you need to review spend budgets. So what can you do? Is it create a resource group? Definitely not. Resource group is a logical container you have to create to place your Azure workloads. Is it create Azure policies? Yep, you can create policies to place any condition on any workload, but that is not going to resolve targeting and reviewing spends. Is it billing groups? Definitely not. That is not going to resolve either. So the correct answer is create management groups. Management group can be used to organize and manage subscriptions. Let's look at question number 2. You would like to categorize resources and billing for different departments like IT and HR. The billing needs to be consolidated across multiple resource groups, and you need to ensure that everyone complies with this solution. What should you do? So you need to choose 2 to complete the solutions. So within the exam, you might find you need to choose more than one answer to complete the whole solution. So what are the keywords here? So you need to categorize resources and billing for different departments, and you need a solution for that. And the second is the billing need to be consolidated across multiple resource group. So is it create a subscription account rule? Definitely not. Is it add the group into a single resource group? By adding a group into a resource group is not going to solve that problem. Is it create a billing group for each department? That is a time-consuming and not an efficient way of doing things. So the correct answer is create tags for each department. So by creating tags, you would be able to filter and categorize each department using different tag. And the second answer is create an Azure policy as well. So you should create a tag with key value pair like department like HR or sales, etc. And then you can then create an Azure policy which requires the tag to be applied before a resource is created. That's why these 2 are part of the solution. So let's look at the third question. Your company financial controller wants to be notified whenever the company is halfway to spending the money allocated for cloud services. What should you do? And you need to select only one answer. All right, so the key over here is you need to have a mechanism to notify your financial controller whenever you are nearing to your spending limit. So is it by creating an Azure subscription? Is it by creating an Azure reservation? Definitely not. Reservation is an ability to reserve a compute in Azure to save cost on this workload. Is it to create a management group? Management group is created to manage multiple subscriptions at once. Is it entering workload in the total cost of ownership calculator? It's absolutely ridiculous. So these 3 are not the right answer. So the correct answer is create a budget and a spending threshold. Billing alerts help you monitor and manage billing activity for your Azure accounts. You can set up a total of 5 billing alerts per subscriptions with a different threshold and up to 2 email recipients for each alert. Monthly budgets are evaluated against spending every 4 hours, and budgets reset automatically at the end of the period. Let's look at the next question. Your organization has several Azure policies that you would like to create and enforce for a new branch office. What should you do? And you need to select one answer. It's a pretty straightforward question. So you have several Azure policies, and what can you do to enforce it? We just learned about it. So the correct answer is Azure Policy Initiative. Nothing else can resolve it, not by creating a management group, or not by creating a resource group, or not by having a subscription. So you have a bunch of Azure policies. You create a policy initiative to enforce these policies to your branch office. A policy initiative would include all the policies of interest. Once your initiative is created, you can assign the definition to establish its scope. A scope determines what resources or grouping of resources the policy assignment gets enforced on. Right. So the next question is, your manager asks you to explain how Azure uses resource group. You provide all the following information except one. So I think three of the solution or three of the choices given below are right and one of the statement is wrong. So we just have to eliminate which one is wrong. So I'm going to read out from the beginning. Resources can be in only one resource group, which is absolutely right. When you create an Azure resource, you are supposed to place that resource in a logical container called resource group, and you can only place that resource in one resource group. Second statement, resources can be moved from one resource group to another resource group. Absolutely possible. So when you would like to move a resource from one resource to another resource group, all you have to do is log into the Azure portal or use the PowerShell and move a resource from one resource group to another resource group. Another tip is that you can move resources from one subscription to another subscription as well. Not all the resources though, but most of the resources are possible. The next option is resource groups can be nested. That is not possible. Resource groups cannot be nested. So that is the wrong option here, but the right answer for this particular question. So let's read the last option. Role-based access control can be applied to the resource group. Absolutely possible. So you can create a role-based access control granular permission to the resource group or for resources as well. Let's look at the question number 6. Which of the following would be a good example of when to use a resource lock? Select one. Again, we are going to go through each statement and we are going to find the appropriate statement where we feel this is the best place where we can use the resource lock. So I'm going to start from the bottom. A resource group for a new branch office that is just starting up. I don't think you need to place a resource group or a resource lock for a resource group for a new branch office which is just starting up. It is not even relevant for it. A storage account used to temporarily store images processed in a development environment. Absolutely not, because first of all, it's a development environment, and second of all, it's a temporary store to place your image processing. So you don't need a lock there. It's not a critical resource. Next statement, a non-production virtual machine used to test occasional application build. Again, not an ideal scenario where you will place a resource lock because first of all, it's a non-production virtual machine, and second, it is only occasionally used to test. So the correct answer is an ExpressRoute circuit with connectivity back to your on-premises network. Resource lock prevent another user in your organization from accidentally deleting or modifying critical resource, and ExpressRoute is a critical resource in an organization. All right, let's look at question number 7. Your company hires a new IT administrator. She needs to manage a resource group with first-tier web servers, including assigning permissions. However, she should not have access to other resource group inside the subscription. All right, so we need to prevent her from accessing other resources within the subscription. That's the key statement here, guys. And you need to configure role-based access. What should you do? And you only need to select one. So what do you guys think the right answer is? Is it assigning her a subscription owner access? Definitely not. If you assign the IT administrator the subscription owner right, she would be able to access any resources in that particular subscription. Is it assigning her with a subscription contributor? Again, she would be able to access other resources within the subscription as well. Is it assigning her to the resource group owner? Absolutely correct. So you would assign this IT administrator lady a resource group owner rights, because The new IT administrator need to be able to assign just permissions. To assign permission, you need an owner right, not the contributor right. All right, so let's look at the last question on this module. You have 3 virtual machines, VM1, VM2, and VM3, in a resource group. The help desk hires a new employee. The new employee must be able to modify the settings on VM3, but not on VM1 and VM2. Your solution must minimize administrative overhead. What should you do? And select one. So the new employee must only be able to modify the settings on VM3. So you need to prevent that employee from modifying anything on VM1 and VM2. So out of these options, what do you think is going to be the right answer? So let's go and read out the statements. Assign the user to the contributor role on the resource group. Definitely not. Because if you assign somebody a contributor role on the resource group, that user will be able to modify anything within that resource group. That includes VM1 and VM2. So the next option is assign the user the contributor role on VM3. Absolutely right. So you only assign the contributor role on VM3 so that the user can modify anything on VM3, but not on VM1 and VM2. So that is the right answer.
In this section of the video, we are going to go through Module 3, which is Azure Administration Review Question.
Let's look at the first question. You are creating a new resource group to use for testing. Which 2 of the following parameters are required when you create a resource group with PowerShell or CLI? Select 2. So when you're going to create a resource group, what are the 2 parameters required if you use PowerShell or CLI? Is it tag? Definitely not. Tag is an optional parameter. Is it subscription? You don't have to provide subscription as a parameter anywhere. Is it region? Again, region is not a default parameter as well. So the 2 required parameters when creating a resource in PowerShell or CLI are location and name. Location and name are required by PowerShell, new-AZ resource group, and CLI, which is AZ group create. So let's go through question number 2. Which of the following is not true about Cloud Shell? And you need to select one. So I'm going to read out all the statement and figure out which one is going to be not true. So the first statement is authenticates automatically for instant access to your resources. Absolutely correct. So Cloud Shell authenticate automatically. Second statement, each user account can be assigned multiple machines, which is not true. Each user account cannot be assigned multiple machines. The Cloud Shell is assigned one machine per user account. So that statement is not true. So let's go through other statements as well. Cloud Shell provides both Bash and PowerShell session. Absolutely true. Cloud Shell provides an editor. Yes, you will get an editor with the Cloud Shell. And the last one is Cloud Shell requires an Azure file share, which is again true as well. So the wrong statement is each user account can be assigned multiple machines. No, you can assign one machine per user account. All right, the next question. You are managing Azure locally using PowerShell. You have launched the app as an administrator. Which of the following command would you use first? Select one. Which command you are going to use? So the right answer is connect-az account. When you are working locally, you are not automatically logged into Azure. So the first thing you should do is to connect to Azure and provide your credentials. You have a new Azure subscription and need to move resources to that subscription. Which of the following cannot be moved? So you need to find out which resource out of the list provided below cannot be moved. Is it key vault? You can move a key vault. Definitely you can move a storage account and a virtual machine. The one thing which you cannot move is a tenant. A tenant cannot be moved between subscriptions. Next question. Which of the following is not an element in the template schema? Select one. So we learned about template and different parts of the template. So we learned about functions, which is part of template schema. We learned about outputs, which is part of the template schema. And we learned about parameters as well, which is part of the schema as well. The one thing which is not part of the template is inputs. Inputs is not a part of template schema. All right, the next question is, which of the following best describes the format of an Azure Resource Manager template? We talked about it quite a lot, so I'm sure all of you are aware of it. This is definitely not an XML document. It's not a text document. It's not a markdown document as well. The format is called a JSON. A JSON document with key value pairs. An Azure Resource Manager template is a JSON document with a key value pairs. Okay, let's look at the last question. You are reviewing your virtual machine usage. You notice that you have reached the limit of virtual machine in US East region. Which of the following provides the easiest solution? You need to select one. If you remember, I talked about if you reach the limit on any particular usage limit or a resource limit in your subscription, you can always go to your Quota and request support to increase the limit. So you won't be able to do this by adding another resource group or changing your subscription plan or resizing your virtual machine. This is being done by raising a support ticket with Microsoft to increase the quota. So if you need to increase the default limit, there is a request increase link. You will complete and submit the support request so that Microsoft can increase the quota.
In this section of the video, we're going to go through virtual networking review questions. This is module 4.
All right, so let's look at the first question. Your company has an existing Azure tenant named a domain name .onmicrosoft.com. The company wants to start using another domain name, which is a custom domain name for their Azure resources. You add a custom domain name to Azure. Now you need to add a DNS record to prepare for verifying the custom domain. Which two of the record type would you create? And you need to select two answers. So if you remember when we talked about the DNS and the custom domain, and we went through two record types which we need to add to verify a custom domain name. I'm not sure whether you remember it. The two records we talked about are the text record and the MX record. So the correct answer is text and MX record. So by default, Azure will prompt you to create a custom text record in the DNS zone to verify a custom domain. Optionally, you can use an MX record instead. The result is the same. Other record types are not supported. Let's look at the question number 2. You're planning to configure networking in Microsoft Azure. Your company has new Microsoft Azure presence with the following network characteristics: one virtual network and one subnet using an IP, and does not have any existing resources, and your on-premises data center have the following network characteristics. And we have 10 subnets using the same network range. So the company intended to use 192.168.1.0 on-premises and 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. And you need to update the company environment to enable the needed functionality. What should you do? And we have to pick two answers to complete the solution. So the first step we have to do is we have to delete 192.168.0.0/23 from Azure because it overlaps with 192.168.1.0, which is intended to use for the on-premises. So that is the first step we have to do. And the second is we need to create a new subnet in Azure. So definitely not deleting the second one. The third option is create a mismatched public subnet in Azure and on-premises. That is not the right answer. Is it creating a subnet for 192.168.0.23 in the on-premises environment? Definitely not. We have to create a subnet in Azure because we deleted a subnet from Azure. So the correct answer is create a subnet for 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. And this is to enable the usage in Azure. Let's look at question number 3. You're planning your Azure network implementation to support your company's migration to Azure. Your first task is to prepare for the deployment of the first set of VMs. And the first set of VMs that you are deploying have the following requirements. So what are these requirements? Customers on the internet must be able to communicate directly with the web application on the VMs. And the IP configuration must be the zone redundant. All right, so we know what are the requirements from the customer. Let's read the further question. You need to configure the environment to prepare for the first VM. Additionally, you need to minimize the cost whenever possible while still meeting the requirements. So what should you do? You need to select one answer. So let's go and read this statement and figure out what should we do to meet this requirement. Is it creating a basic IP address after the first VM created and remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address to the NIC? It is not going to resolve the problem. The basic IP address is not what we are looking at. Again, second option is create a basic public IP address during the creation of first VM. Again, the basic IP address is not going to cut out. Another option is create a standard public IP address. Yep, we need a standard public IP address after the first VM is created, and remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address. No, we don't have to remove the public IP address. So we don't have to remove the private IP address. All right, so the next option is create a standard public IP address during the creation of the first VM. Associate the public IP address for the VM NICs. Absolutely correct. So to meet the requirement of communicating directly with the consumers on the internet, you must use a public IP address. And to meet the requirement of having a zone redundant configuration, you must use a standard public IP address. And of the answer choice, only the answer that creates the standard public IP address first, then associate it during the VM creation, and functions meet the requirement. All right, so let's look at the next question. You deploy a new domain name contoso.com to the domain controllers in Azure, and you have the following domain join machine. I have VM1, VM2, VM3, and VM4. Each VMs have an IP address as well, 10, 11, 12, and 101. So I have VM1, VM2, VM3, and VM99. And the IP address of VMs are 10, 11, 12, and 101. You need to add DNS records so that host names resolve their respective IP addresses. Additionally, you need to add a DNS record so that internet.contoso.com resolves to VM99. So what should you do? And we need to pick two answers to complete the whole solution. So we learned about these different types of records and how you can add these records in the DNS in the previous module. So the correct answer is adding a record and a CNAME record. So let me explain you why this is the correct answer. In this scenario, the host name have IPv4 IP addresses. Thus, to resolve these host name, you must add a name record for each VMs. To enable internet.contoso.com to resolve in vm99.contoso.com, you need to add a CNAME record. A CNAME record is often referred to as an alias. Your company is preparing to move some services and VMs to Microsoft Azure. The company has opted to use Azure DNS to provide name resolution. A project begins to configure the name resolution, and the project identifies following requirements. So let's understand the requirements first. The first requirement is a new domain will be used, and then a domain will be, and the second requirement is a domain will have a DNS record for internal and external resources. And the third requirement is minimize ongoing administrative overhead. Right. So you need to prepare and configure the environment with a new domain name and a test host of www. Which is the following steps should you perform? And we need to choose 3 answers to complete the solution. So let's go through the options. Register a domain name with the domain registrar. Absolutely. So if you need to get the domain right and you need to have a www, you need to register the domain name first, which is correct. Register a domain name with Microsoft Azure. Definitely not. That is not possible at all. You need to register a domain name with a domain registrar. Next option is delegate the new domain name to Azure DNS. Absolutely correct. You need to delegate the domain name to Azure DNS. You need to add address A record to Azure name server. So you don't need to add an A record in this instance. And add a DNS glue records to point to Azure name servers. Again, you don't have to do that. And add a record for www. Absolutely correct. So you need to add a www record to complete the solution. So for private domain names, you must register with a registrar because Azure isn't a registrar. Thereafter, you need to delegate the new domain name to Azure DNS, which enables the Azure DNS to be the authority for the domain. After delegation, you should add a test host of www and test name resolution. All right, let's look at the question number 6. You have a VM with 2 NICs named NIC1 and NIC2. NIC1 is connected to this IP address subnet, and NIC2 is connected to another IP subnet. The only difference is 8.0 and 20.8. You plan to upgrade the VM configuration to provide the following functionality. So what are the VM configurations? The first configuration is enable direct communication from internet to TCP port 443. Second configuration change is maintain existing communication across 10.10.8.0/24 and 10.20.8.0/24 subnets, and maintain a simple configuration whenever possible. You need to update the VM configuration to support the new functionality. So what should you do? So you have a lot of changes here. So what are you going to do to make sure that you update the VM's configuration to support all these new functionality? So let's read out the statements. Remove the private IP address from NIC2 and then assign public IP address to it, and then create an inbound security role. Definitely not the right answer because it's add more complexity to the existing solution. Second statement, add a third NIC and associate public IP address to it, and then create an inbound security role. Again, absolutely wrong. It is not even going to resolve the problem. Third option is associate a public IP address to NIC and create an inbound security role. Absolutely correct. To enable direct communication from internet to the VM, you must have a public IP address. You also need an inbound security rule. And you can associate the public IP address with NIC1 and NIC2, although in this scenario only presents an option to associate it with NIC2. So this is the correct answer. Let's look at question number 7. You are currently using Network Security Group or NSGs to control how your network traffic flows in and out of your virtual network subnet and network interfaces. You want to customize how your NSGs work. All right, so you need to customize your NSGs. For all incoming traffic, you need to apply your security rules to both the virtual machine and at the subnet level. Which of the following options will let you accomplish this? So we need to choose two answers to complete the solution. So let's read the options. Configure the allow VNet inbound security rule for all NSGs. That is not going to help it. Create rules for both NICs and subnet with the allow action. Absolutely correct. You should add rules with higher priority than the default rule if need. All right, that's the correct answer. Delete the default rule. You won't be able to delete the default rule. That is not possible. The last option is add rules with higher priorities than the default rule. Absolutely correct. So because you cannot delete the default rules, you can override it by adding the higher priority. So the correct answer is 2 and 4. So you should add rules with higher priority than the default rules if needed, as you cannot delete the default rules. Also, in order to meet the requirement to apply security rules to both VMs and subnet level, you should create rules with an allow action for both. And there is no need to configure the allow VNet inbound rule, as it as a default rule for any new security group you create. All right, let's look at the question number 8. You need to ensure that Azure DNS can resolve names for your registered domain. What should you implement? We just need to select one answer. And the correct answer is zone delegation. Once you create the DNS zone in Azure DNS, you need to set up NS record in the parent zone to ensure that Azure DNS is the authoritative source for your name resolution for your zone. For domains purchased from a registrar, your registrar will offer the option to set up those NS records. When delegating a domain to Azure DNS, you must use the name server names provided by the Azure DNS. Domain delegation does not require the name server name to use the same top level domain as your domain. All right, let's look at the last question. You are configuring the Azure Firewall. You need to allow Windows Update network traffic through the firewall. Which of the following should you use? You need to select just one answer. It's not network rule. You won't be able to achieve it through NAT rules or NAT rules. And destination inbound rule is not correct. So the correct answer is application rules. Application rules define fully qualified domain names or FQDNs that can be accessed from a subnet. That would be appropriate to allow a Windows Update network traffic.
In this section, we are going to go through inter-site connectivity review question, which is module 5.
You want to connect different VNets in the same region as well as different regions and decide to use VNet peering to accomplish this. Which of the following is the true benefit of VNet peering? And we need to select 2 to complete the whole solution. So I'm basically going to read out the statement to find if that statement is true or not. The first statement is the virtual network can exist in any Azure cloud region. That is not true. The virtual network cannot exist in any cloud region. The second statement is the network traffic between peered virtual network is private. Absolutely true. Peering is easy to configure and manage and requiring little to no downtime. Absolutely correct as well. It's super easy to configure the VNet peering. And the last statement is gateway transit can be configured regionally or globally. That is wrong. So peering is efficient as there is no downtime to resources in either virtual network when creating the peering or after peering is created. And also for security, network traffic between peered virtual network is private. The traffic between virtual network is kept on the Microsoft backbone network. While virtual network can exist in any Azure public cloud region, they cannot exist in Azure National Cloud. The national clouds have very specific customer requirement to their use and operation. These services are confined within the geographic border of specific countries and operated by local personnel. So the gateway transit only applies to regional VNet peering and not to the global VNet peering. Let's look at the question number 2. Your company is preparing to implement a site-to-site VPN to Microsoft Azure. You are selected to plan and implement the VPN. Currently, you have an Azure subscription, an Azure Virtual Network, and an Azure Gateway subnet. You need to prepare the on-premises environment and Microsoft Azure to meet the prerequisites of the site-to-site VPN. Later, you will create the VPN connection and test it. What should you do? And we have to select 3 answers to complete the solution. Alright, so let's read out the options. So what we are trying to achieve over here is you're trying to prepare the on-premises environment and Microsoft Azure to meet the prerequisites of site-to-site VPN. So keep that in your mind when you're reading these solutions. The first statement is obtain a VPN device for the on-premises environment. Absolutely, we need an on-premises device to set up the site-to-site VPN, correct? Obtain a VPN device for Azure environment, which is completely wrong. You don't need a device in Azure environment, you only need a gateway. Third statement is create a virtual network gateway and local network gateway in Azure. Absolutely correct. So you need to create a gateway and a local network gateway in Azure to set an establishing connection between on-prem environment and Azure. The next statement is create a virtual network gateway ExpressRoute in Azure. So we are trying to create a site-to-site VPN, not an ExpressRoute. So that is wrong. Next statement is obtain a public IPv4 IP address without NAT for using VPN device. Absolutely correct. So you need a IPv4 address without a NAT address for your VPN device. So we got our 3 statements right. So last statement is obtain IPv4 address behind the NAT. So that is completely wrong. So we don't need NAT for the VPN devices. So the prerequisites for the site-to-site VPN are having a compatible VPN device on premises, having a public IPv4 without a NAT on on-premises device, and creating a VPN gateway and local gateway in Azure. Please note that the IPv6 is not supported for VPNs, and ExpressRoute is a different setup and not part of the site-to-site VPN. Okay, let's look at the question number 3. Your company is preparing to implement persistent connectivity to Microsoft Azure, and your company has a single site headquarters which has an on-premises data center. The company establishes the following requirements for the connectivity. The connectivity must be persistent, and the connectivity must provide for the entire on-premises site. You need to implement a connectivity solution to meet the requirement. So what should you do? We just need to pick one answer to complete the solution. Is it implementing a point-to-site VPN? Definitely not. That is not going to resolve the issue. That is for one-to-one connection. Is it to implement VNet to VNet VPN? Again, that is to connect 2 networks together. Is it to implement VGW or VPC? Definitely not. So the correct answer is implement a site-to-site VPN. In this scenario, only one of the answers provide the persistent connectivity to Azure, which is site-to-site VPN. A VNet to VNet connects 2 Azure virtual networks together. A point-to-site VPN is used for individual connection. A VPC and VGW are relevant for Amazon AWS. Alright, so let's look at question number 4. You are configuring VNet peering across two virtual networks, VNet 1 and VNet 2, and you're configuring the VPN gateways. You want VNet 2 to able to use the VNet 1's gateway to get the resources outside the peering. So what should you do? You just need to select one. So I'm going to read out the statements from below to see if that makes any sense. Do not select allow gateway transit to use remote gateways on either VNet 1 or VNet 2. Not the right answer. And we have select allow gateway transit on all three answers. We just need to select allow gateway transit on VNet 1 and use remote gateways on VNet 2. So that is the correct answer. Select allow gateway transit on VNet 1 and use gateways on VNet 2. VNet 1 will allow VNet 2 to transit external resources, and VNet 2 will expect to use a remote gateway. Let's look at question number 5. You are configuring a site-to-site VPN connection between your on-premises network and Azure network. The on-premises network uses a Cisco ASA VPN device, and you have checked to ensure the device is on a validated list of VPN devices. Before you proceed to configure the device, what two pieces of information should you ensure to have? You need to select two. Is it the shared access signature key for the recovery services vault? Definitely not. That is for DR and backup. Is it the shared key you provided when you created the site-to-site VPN connection? Absolutely correct. So you need to have the shared key you provided when you created the site-to-site VPN connection. So what is the next answer? Is it the gateway routing method provided when you created the site-to-site connection? Definitely not. Is it the static IP address of your virtual network gateway? We don't need the static IP address, but we need the public IP address. So the next statement is the public IP address of your virtual network gateway. That is correct. So those two are our correct answers. So you will need two things, the shared key and the public IP address of your virtual network gateway. The shared key was provided when you created the site-to-site VPN connection. Let's look at question number 6. You manage a large data center that is running out of space. You propose extending the data center to Azure using multi-protocol label switching virtual private network. Which connectivity option should you select? So we are trying to extend the data center using a multi-protocol label switching. So the correct answer for that is ExpressRoute. ExpressRoute is the best choice for extending the data center as it can use an any-to-any IP VPN connectivity model. An MPLS VPN, typically provided by an IP VPN networks, enables connectivity between Microsoft Cloud and your branch offices and data centers. Let's look at question number 7. You are creating a connection between two virtual networks. Performance is a key concern. Which of the following will most influence performance? You need to select one. If performance is the key concern, do you think selecting a route-based VPN is gonna resolve the problem? Definitely not. Do you think selecting a policy-based VPN is gonna solve the problem? Definitely not. And it is definitely not gonna resolve if you specify a DNS server. So the correct answer is ensuring you select an appropriate gateway SKU. So the gateway SKU selection directly affects performance. The gateway SKU control the number of tunnels and connections that are available. This affects the overall aggregate throughput of the connection. Let's look at the last question. Your manager asks you to verify some information about Azure Virtual WANs. Which of the following statements are true? And you need to select 3 choices. Alright, so I'm going to read out each statement to see if that is true or false. You must use one of the approved connectivity partner providers. That is false. You must use VPN device that provide IKE version 2 and version 1 IPsec support, which is true. Virtual WAN support ExpressRoute. Again, that is true. And virtual WAN supports site-to-site connection as well. Again, that is true. Virtual WAN does not support point-to-site connection. That is false. Virtual WAN support point-to-site connection as well. You can switch between the basic and standard plans. No, you can't switch between basic and standard plans. So the virtual WAN support ExpressRoute and any VPN device that is IPE version 2 and version 1 IPsec compliant.
In this section, we are going to go through Network Traffic Management Review question, which is Module 6.
Let's look at the question number 1. Which of the following two features of Azure networking provide the ability to redirect all internet traffic back to your company's on-premises server for packet inspection? We need to select two answers, which is going to complete the whole solution. So what are these two features in Azure networking which can provide you this functionality? Is it user-defined route? Absolutely correct. Is it cross-premises network connectivity? Definitely wrong. Is it traffic manager? No, traffic manager provides a different functionality altogether. Is it forced tunneling? Absolutely correct. And not system routes. So user-defined routes and forced tunneling are the correct answers. You can use forced tunneling to redirect internet-bound traffic back to your company's on-premises infrastructure. And forced tunneling is commonly used in scenarios where organizations want to implement packet inspection or corporate audits. And forced tunneling in Azure is configured via Virtual Network User-Defined Routes or UDR. Your company provides customers a virtual network in the cloud, and you have dozens of Linux virtual machines in another virtual network. You need to install an Azure load balancer to direct traffic between the virtual network. What should you do? We have learned about this when we talked about the load balancer. So which load balancer would you choose here? Because you need to redirect the traffic to the right virtual network. So do you install the private load balancer? Definitely not. Is it the public load balancer? No. You need to route the traffic to an internal virtual network. So is it an external load balancer? Absolutely not. So the correct answer is install an internal load balancer. Azure has two types of load balancer, public and internal. An internal load balancer directs traffic only to resources that are inside a virtual network or that uses a VPN to access Azure infrastructure. Let's look at question number 3. Your company has a popular regional website. The company plans to move it to Microsoft Azure and host it in Canada East region. The web team has established the following requirements for managing the web traffic. So what are these requirements? So the requirements are evenly distribute incoming web requests across a farm of 10 Azure VMs, support many incoming requests including spikes during peak times, minimize the complexity, and minimize ongoing cost. Which of the following would you select for this scenario? We just need to select one. So based on all these requirements, what do you think is going to be the right Azure solution which you can implement? Is it a traffic manager? No, traffic manager is to route traffic based on a particular routing method. Is it application gateway? Definitely not. It's not Azure Cloud Services. So the correct answer is Azure Load Balancer. In this scenario, the requirements call for load balancing of website with minimal complexity and cost. The website is in a single region, which rules out Azure Traffic Manager, which is geared towards a distributed web application. And Azure CDN is complex and expensive, and it is best suited for delivering static web content at various locations worldwide with maximum performance. And Azure Cloud Services are suited for applications and APIs, not for this scenario. So the correct answer is load balancer. All right, let's look at the question number 4. You deploy an internal load balancer between your web tier and app tier servers. You configure a custom HTTP health probe. All right, so that's the keyword here. Which two of the following are not true? So please make sure you understand this. So we are trying to find which scenario is not appropriate in this sentence. And we have to select 2 false answers. Okay, let me read out each statement to find out which one is not true. The load balancer manages the health probe. Absolutely correct. So that is not the right answer. By default, health probe check the endpoint every 30 seconds. That is not true because the health probe checks the endpoint every 15 seconds. The next statement is the instance is healthy if it responds with HTTP 200 error, which is absolutely correct. So we learned about that when we learned about the health probe in load balancer. You can change the amount of time between health probe check. Absolutely correct. You can definitely modify that. And the last statement is you can change the number of failures within a time period, which is wrong. You can change the number of consecutive failures, but you cannot specify a time period for the failures. Let's look at question number 5. Which criteria does application gateway use to route requests to a web server? So what is that criteria which Azure Application Gateway use? We need to select one statement from this. Is it the user authentication information? Absolutely not. The region in which the servers hosting the web application are located? No, that is traffic manager. Is it the IP address of the web server? That is the target of the request. No, that is a different routing method altogether. So the correct answer is the host name, port, and path in the URL of the request. Azure Application Gateway uses the host name, port, and the path in the URL of the request. Which load balancing strategy does the Application Gateway implement? You need to select one answer. Is it distribute requests to each available server in the backend pool in turn, round robin? Absolutely correct. So we hit the jackpot. So the first statement itself is correct. So Application Gateway distribute requests to each available server in the backend pool using the round robin method. So that's the strategy Application Gateway implement. You have several websites and are using Traffic Manager to distribute the network traffic. You are bringing a new endpoint online but are not sure that it is ready to accept a full load of requests. Which Traffic Manager routing algorithm should you use? You need to select one. So what's the algorithm you can use for your website to distribute the network traffic to accept the full load of requests? Is it round robin? Definitely not. Not the priority, not the geographic one. So the correct answer is weighted. You will use the weighted routing algorithm. This will put the endpoint into the rotation with a minimum amount of traffic. Your company has a website that allows users to customize their experience by downloading an app. Demand for the app has increased, so you have added another virtual network with 2 more virtual machines. These virtual machines are dedicated to serving the app downloads. You need to ensure the additional download requests do not affect the website performance. Your solution must route all the download requests to the 2 new servers you have installed recently. What action will you recommend? You need to route the traffic to the new servers you have installed. So what is the routing method you would choose? We just need to select one answer. Is it adding an application gateway? Definitely not. A routing table is not going to resolve the problem. It is not going to resolve the problem by creating a local network gateway or a user-defined route. So the correct answer is configure the traffic manager. Traffic manager lets you control the distribution of user traffic to your endpoints running in different data centers around the world. And the traffic manager uses DNS and can route traffic to your 2 new download servers. Let's look at the last question. You are deploying the application gateway and want to ensure incoming requests are checked for common security threats like cross-site scripting and crawlers. To address your concerns, what should you do? So we learned about this when we were talking about application gateway. So the correct answer is install the web application firewall. The web application firewall is an optional component that handles incoming requests before they reach a listener. The web application firewall checks each request for many common threats based on the Open Web Application Security Project or OWASP.
In this section, we are going to go through questions on Azure Storage Module, which is Module 7.
You work for an open source development company. You use Microsoft Azure for a variety of storage needs. Up to now, all the storage was used for internal purposes only. It is organized in block blobs. Each block blob is in its own container. Each container is set to default settings. In total, you have 50 block blobs. The company has decided to provide read access to the data in the block blobs. As part of releasing more information about their open source development efforts, you need to reconfigure the storage to meet the following requirements. So what is the requirement? The requirement is all block blobs must be readable by anonymous internet users. And you need to configure the storage to meet the requirements. So what should you do? You just need to select one answer. So let's look at the requirement. Your requirement is to provide a block blob which is readable by anonymous internet users. So while creating block blob, you have multiple settings. How you can allow somebody else to access your container. So let's go through the statements. Create a new container, move all blobs to the new container, and then set the public access level to blob, which is correct. So we hit the jackpot. The first option itself is the correct answer. In this scenario, you need to reconfigure 50 containers. While you can do that, it goes against the requirement to reduce the administrative overhead of future access changes. A shared access signature could work here, but not with the settings outlined in the answer choice. In this scenario, you should create a new container, move the existing blobs, and then set the public access level to blob. In the future, when access changes are required, you can configure the single container, which would contain all blobs. Your company is planning to store log data, crash dump files, and other diagnostic data for Azure VMs in Azure. The company has issued the following requirements. So what are the requirements? Administrators must be able to browse to the data in the File Explorer. Access over SMB 3.0 must be supported, and the storage must support quotas. You need to choose the storage type to meet the requirements. Which storage type should you use? You just need to choose one. So it's not queues, blob, or table. There is only one storage service in Azure which support SMB 3.0 and other requirement what it is mentioned over here. So the correct answer is Azure Files. Azure Files support SMB 3.0 and is reachable via File Explorer and support quotas. Let's look at question number 3. Your company provides cloud software to audit administrative access in Microsoft Azure resources. The software logs all administrative actions, including all clicks and text input to log files. The software is about to be released from beta, and the company is concerned about storage performance. You need to deploy a storage solution for the log files to maximize performance. What should you do? You just need to select one answer to complete the solution. Is it to deploy Azure Files using SMB 3.0? We are not looking for an Azure File SMB solution. It's not a table storage and queue storage. Yes, absolutely, we need a blob storage, but not block blobs. So the correct answer is deploy blob storage using Append blobs. Append blobs optimize append operations. In this scenario, the company need to write data to log files. Most often, appending data until a new file is generated. Block blobs are cost efficient but not designed specifically for append operations, so performance isn't as high. Let's look at the question number 4. Your company is building an app in Azure. The app has the following storage requirements. The storage must be reachable programmatically through a REST API. The storage must be globally redundant. And storage must be accessible privately within the company's Azure environment. And the last requirement is storage must be optimal for unstructured data as well. Which type of Azure storage should you use for this app? You just need to select one. So based on this requirement, the correct answer is blob storage. Because Azure Blob Storage is optimal for understanding data and meet the requirement for the company's app. You use a Microsoft Azure storage account for storing large number of video and audio files. You create containers to store each type of file and wants to limit access to those files for specific periods. Additionally, the files can only be accessed through shared access signature. You need the ability to revoke access to the files and to change the period for which users can access the files. What should you do in order to accomplish this in the most simple and effective way? You just need to select one answer. Is it by creating a SAS for each user and delete the SAS when the user wants to prevent access? Absolutely not. You use rights management service to control access. That is for document services. That is not the right answer. Or do you implement stored access policies for each container to enable revocation of access or change of duration? Absolutely correct. You should implement stored access policies which will let you change access based on permission or duration by replacing the policy with a new one or deleting it altogether to revoke access. You need to provide a contingent staff employee temporary read-only access to the contents of an Azure storage account container named media. It is important that you grant access while adhering to the security principle of least privilege. What should you do? You need to select one answer. Do you set the public access level to the container? Definitely not. Do you generate a shared access signature SAS token for the container? Absolutely correct. You should generate a SAS token for the container which provide access either to the entire container or blobs. Your organization maintains historical images for large media companies. There are thousands of photos requiring over 600 TB of storage. Your data center has only limited bandwidth, and you need to quickly move the data to Azure Blob Storage. Additionally, security of the data, including chain of custody logs and 256-bit encryption, is required. Which of the following products would you recommend using? So the requirement is more than 600 TB of storage and it requires 256-bit encryption as well. So the correct option is DataBox Heavy. The DataBox Heavy supports 1 petabyte total capacity per order and up to 800 TB usage capacity per order. Let's look at question number 8. You're using blob storage. Which of the following is true? You need to select one answer. The cool access tier is for the frequent access of object in the storage account. Definitely not. Is it the hot access tier? Is for storing large amount of data that is infrequently accessed. Totally wrong. The performance tier you select does not affect pricing. That is not the right answer. The correct answer is you can switch between hot and cool performance tiers at any time. Changing the storage account tier from cool to hot requires a charge equal to reading all the data existing in the storage account. However, changing the account storage tier from hot to cool requires a charge equal to writing all the data into the cold tier. You are planning a delegation model for your Azure storage, and the company has issued the following requirement. For the non-production environment, you must have an automated time-limited access, and the production environment, you must have an unrestricted access to the storage resources. You need to configure storage access to meet the requirements. What should you do? Each answer presents the part of the solution, and we need to select two answers. Use shared access signature for non-production apps. Absolutely correct. Because for the non-production environment, we need to have an automated time-limited access. So SaaS can give you that. Use shared access signature for the production apps. We are looking at unrestricted access, so definitely not. Use access keys for non-production app. Definitely not. We need to use shared access signature. Use access keys for production app. Absolutely correct. Because that will give us unrestricted access to the storage resources. So the shared access signature provide a way to provide more granular storage access than access keys. And access keys provide unrestricted access to the storage resources, which is the requirement for the production app in the scenario. Your company has a file server named FS01, and the server has a single shared folder that uses access to shared files. The company wants to make the same files available from Microsoft Azure, and the company have following requirements. Microsoft Azure should maintain the exact same data as the shared folder, all right? And the file deleted on either side, on-prem or cloud, shall be subsequently or automatically deleted from the other side. And we need to implement a solution, and we need to select one answer. So we have learned about this when we learned about Azure Files and File Sync. So the correct answer is Azure File and File Sync. So let me explain why it is. In this scenario, only Azure File Sync can keep FS01 and Azure synced up and maintain the same data. All right, let's look at question number 11. Which of the following replicates your data to a secondary region? Maintain 6 copies of your data and is a default replication option. So we learned about this when we talked about different types of replication available in the storage account. So the correct answer is read access geo-redundant storage, and RAGRS is the default replication option. You have an existing storage account in Microsoft Azure. It stores unstructured data. You create a new storage account, and you need to move half of the data from the existing storage account to the new storage account. What tool should you use? You need to select one. Is it the Azure portal? Definitely not. Is it the file server resource manager? No. It's not the RoboCopy as well. So the correct answer is AzCopy command line tool. The key in this scenario is that you need to move data between storage account. The AzCopy tool can work with 2 different storage accounts. The other tool do not copy data between storage accounts. Just in case if you're wondering what other tool you can use Azure Storage Explorer.
In this section, we are going to go through Azure Virtual Machine, which is Module 8 review questions.
Let's look at the question number 1. You host a service with 2 virtual machines. You discover that occasional outages cause your service to fail. What 2 actions can you do to minimize the impact of the outages? You need to select two answers to complete the whole part of the solution. So what are the two solutions you can pick from the below which can minimize the impact of the outages what you are having right now? Is it adding a third instance of the virtual machine? Definitely not. Adding a new virtual machine is going to add more resources to your whole solution. That is not going to resolve the outage problem. Is it to add a network gateway? Definitely not. Network gateway is either for a VPN solution or a VNet peering. Put the virtual machine in a scale set? Definitely not. Putting a virtual machine in a scale set will give you an auto scale capability. So the correct answer is add a load balancer and put the virtual machine in an availability set. So to minimize the impact, put the virtual machine in an availability set and add a load balancer. Let's look at question number 2. You are researching Microsoft Azure for your company. The company is considering deploying Windows-based VMs in Azure. However, before moving forward, the management team has asked you to research the cost associated with the Azure VM. You need to document the configuration options that are likely to save the company money on their Azure VMs. Which option should you document? And each answer present part of the solution, and we need to select 4 to complete the whole solution. So I'm going to read out each statement to pick the right option which can help us save the money on the Windows VM which this particular company is going to use. Alright, so first statement is use hard disk or HDD instead of solid state drive. Absolutely. So if you I'm not sure that is going to be a wise choice. It's absolutely depending on the application type what you're using. But if you use hard disk instead of SSD, you can reduce this cost. Use unmanaged premium storage instead of managed standard storage. That is not going to make any difference. Premium storage is basically same cost even if you use unmanaged or managed. Bring your own Windows custom images. That is not going to reduce any cost. If you bring your custom image, you are still paying for the license. Use different Azure regions. Absolutely correct. So not all Azure services are priced same on all Azure regions. Some regions have lower price tier. So please make sure to check that when you deploy a solution. Use the least powerful VMs that meet your requirement. Absolutely correct. So sometimes by choosing the right VM is the way forward, not by having the most or well-powered virtual machine for your workload. Always keep an eye on Azure Monitor or Azure Metrics to check if you are utilizing the VM at the optimal level. Place all VMs in the same resource group. No, placing all VM in the same resource group will give you a same life cycle. Bring your own Windows license for each VMs. Absolutely correct. So this is called Azure Hybrid Usage Benefit. So if you bring your own license, Microsoft will give you up to 49% discount on your virtual machine cost. So on this scenario, you will need to document which of these options presented are likely to save company money for the Azure VMs. So in this scenario, we all learned different ways of saving money on Azure VMs. Let's look at question number 3. You're planning to deploy several Linux VMs in Azure. The security team issues a policy that Linux VMs must use an authentication system other than passwords. You need to deploy an authentication method for the Linux VM to meet the requirement. Which authentication method should you use? You need to select one option from here. So it is definitely not secure vault certificate. That is for different solution. Shared access signature is for your storage account. So that is not the right answer. Access keys are again for your storage account. So that's not the right answer. Multi-factor authentication is for securing your user accounts or identities. So that's not the right answer. So the correct answer is SSH key pair. Azure support two authentication methods for Linux VMs, passwords and SSH. Access keys and shared access signature are the access method for Azure storage, not for Azure VMs. Let's look at question number 4. Your company has Windows Server 2012 R2 VMs and Ubuntu Linux VMs in Microsoft Azure. The company has a new project to standardize the configuration of servers across the Azure environment. The company opts to use desired state configuration or DSC across all VMs. You need to ensure that DSC can be used across all the VMs. What two things should you do? Select two. So, is it going to resolve by replacing the Ubuntu VM with the Red Hat VMs? Definitely not. Is it by deploying DSC extension on Windows Server VM? Absolutely correct. And at the same time, because you have Windows Server and Ubuntu VMs, you need to deploy DSC extension for Linux VMs as well. So the DSC is available for Windows Server and Linux-based VMs. In this scenario, you just need to deploy the extension to the existing VM to start using DSC. Let's look at question number 5. Another IT administrator creates an Azure virtual machine scale set with 5 VMs. Later, you notice that VMs are all running at maximum capacity with CPU being fully consumed. However, additional VMs are not deployed in the scale set. You need to ensure that additional VMs are deployed when the CPU is 75% consumed. So what should you do? Select one. So is it by deploying the scale set automation script? Absolutely not. Is it by adding scale set automation script to the library? Again, it's a completely wrong solution. Can you increase the number of count? Yep, you can increase it, but that is not going to resolve the issue. All you have to do is enable the auto scale option. When you have a scale set, you can enable automatic scaling with the auto scale option. When you enable this option, you define the parameters of when to scale. To meet the requirement of this scenario, you need to enable the auto scale option so that additional VMs are created when the CPU is 75% consumed. Please note that the automation script is used to automate the deployment of the scale set and not related to automating the building of additional VMs in the scale set. Your company is deploying a critical business application to Microsoft Azure. The uptime of the application is of utmost importance. The application has the following components: 2 web server, 2 application servers, 2 database servers. You need to design the layout of the VMs to meet the following requirements. Each VM in a tier must run on different hardware. Another requirement is uptime of the application must be maximized. So you need to deploy the VMs to meet the requirements. So what should you do? And we need to select one. Is it to deploy one VM from each tier into one availability set and reminding VM to the separate availability set? Definitely not. That defeats the whole purpose what we are trying to achieve. Deploy the VMs from each tier into a dedicated availability set for the tier. Absolutely correct. An availability set should hold VMs in the same tier because that ensures that the VMs are not dependent on the same physical hardware. If you deploy VMs in a single tier across multiple availability sets, then you have a chance of a tier becoming unavailable due to a hardware issue. In this scenario, each tier should have a dedicated availability set, which is web availability set and app availability set, and a database availability set. Let's look at the last question of this module. Your organization has a security policy that prohibits exposing SSH ports to the outside world. You need to connect to the Azure Linux virtual machine to install software. What should you do? And select one. We learned about this when we talked about different ways of connecting to a virtual machine. If it is a Windows machine, you can connect via RDP and Bastion. For a Linux machine, you can connect via SSH and Bastion service as well. So the correct answer is Bastion service. Azure Bastion service is a new, fully platform managed PaaS service that you provision inside your virtual network. It provides secure and seamless RDP and SSH connectivity to your virtual machines directly in your Azure portal over SSL. When you connect via Azure Bastion, your virtual machines do not need a public IP address. And Bastion provides secure RDP and SSH connectivity to all VMs in virtual network in which it is provisioned. Using Azure Bastion protects your virtual machine from exposing RDP and SSH port to the outside world, while still providing secure access using RDP and SSH. With Azure Bastion, you connect to the virtual machine directly from the Azure portal. You don't need an additional client, agent, or a piece of hardware or software.
In this module, which is module 9, we are going to go through serverless computing review questions.
Let's look at question number 1. You have multiple apps running in a single app service plan, true or false. And each app in the service plan can have different scaling rules. Is it true? Definitely not. It's false. The app service plan is the scale unit of app services. If the plan is configured to run 5 VM instances, then all apps in the plan run on all 5 instances. If the plan is configured for auto-scaling, then all apps in the plan are scaled out together based on the auto-scale settings. Let's look at the question number 2. Which of the following settings are not swapped when you swap an app? Select 3 options. Is it handler mapping? Definitely not. What about publishing endpoints? Yes, you can swap your publishing endpoints. What about general settings such as framework version, 32-bit, or WebSockets? You can't do that. Yes, you can do always on and add custom domain names as well. So the correct answer is publishing endpoints, always on, and custom domain names. Some configuration elements follow the content across a swap, whereas other configuration elements stay in the same slot after a swap. You are administering a production web app. The app requires scaling to 5 instances, 40 GB of storage, and a custom domain name. Which app service plan should you select? And select one. Based on the requirement, the correct answer is standard. The standard app service plan meets the requirement at the least cost. Let's look at the question number 4. You're backing up your app service. Which of the following is included in the backup? You need to select 2 to complete the whole solution. Is it app configuration? Absolutely correct. And another solution which is included in the backup for app service is Azure Database for MySQL. Not the firewall enabled storage, not the SSL enabled Azure Database or Files or Database. So the correct answer is app configuration and Azure Database for MySQL. App service can back up app configuration, file content, and database connected to your apps. And backups can be up to 10 GB of app and database content. Let's look at question number 5. You decide to move all your services to Azure Kubernetes service. Which of the following components will contribute to your monthly Azure charge? As you know that using Azure Kubernetes service in Azure is totally free, except one. The correct answer is node virtual machines. You only pay for the virtual machine instances, storage, and networking resources consumed by the Kubernetes cluster. The service itself is free. Which of the following is not true about container groups? select one. Is it scheduled on multiple host machine? Absolutely, it is not true. Rest everything is true. You can assign container instance a DNS name label. You can expose a single public IP address. And container group can consist of two or more containers and include Azure Files as well. So one which is not true is the first option. A container group is scheduled on a single host machine, not on multiple host machines. Which of the following is the Kubernetes agent that processes the orchestration request from the cluster master and schedules running the requested containers? You need to select one. So the correct answer is kubelet. The kubelet processes the orchestration request from the cluster master and schedules the running the requested containers. You are configuring networking for the Azure Kubernetes service. Which of the following maps incoming direct traffic to the pods? You just need to select one. Is it AKS node? Definitely not. Not the cluster IP or the load balancer. The correct answer is node port. Node ports map incoming direct traffic to the ports. Let's look at the last question. Which method does Azure App Service use to obtain credentials for user attempting to access an app? You just need to select one. So the correct answer is redirection to a provider endpoint. Microsoft Azure App Service app redirects requests to the endpoint that signs in user for that provider.
In this section, we're going to go through data protection, module 10 review questions.
So let's look at the first question. You need to back up files and folders to Azure. Which 3 steps must you perform? So the first step is anyways download, install and register the backup agent. So we have seen a demonstration where I have downloaded the agent and then I downloaded the certificate to register. So that is definitely the first step. So what is the second step? Is it to synchronize the configuration? No. The next step is to back up files and folders. And then what is the next step? Is it create a backup services vault? Definitely not. So the first step is to create a recovery services vault if you are looking from an order. So after you create the recovery services vault, you download the agent and install the backup agent, and then you back up the files and folders. Let's look at question number 2. You are responsible for creating a disaster recovery plan for your data center. You are able to recreate virtual machines from scratch. This includes the operating system, its configuration settings, and patches. Which of the following will provide a bare metal backup of your virtual machine? You need to select one option. So what can you do to back up a bare metal? Is it Azure Backup Mars agent? Definitely not. Mars agent can be used to back up your files and folder. Is it disk snapshot? No. This snapshot is for your Azure virtual machines. Is it Azure Site Recovery? That is for your BCDR. So the correct answer is Azure Backup Server. Azure Backup provides a bare metal backup capability. Let's look at question number 3. You have several Azure VMs that are currently running production workloads. You have a mix of Windows Server and Linux servers, and you need to implement a backup strategy for your production workloads. Which feature should you use in this case? We just need to select one answer. So we have a mix of both Windows and Linux server. So how do you back up? So the correct answer is Azure Backup. For backing up virtual machines running production workload, use Azure Backup. Azure Backup supports application consistent backup for both Windows and Linux virtual machines. You plan to use Azure Backup to protect your virtual machines and data and are ready to create a backup. What is the first thing you need to do? So the first step in BCDR and backup is to create a recovery services vault. When performing a virtual machine backup, you must first create a recovery services vault in the region where you want to store the data. Recovery points are stored in the recovery services vault. While creating a backup policy is a good practice, it is not a dependency to creating a backup. The Azure VM agent is required on Azure virtual machines for backup extensions to work. However, if the VMs are created from the Azure gallery, then the VM agent is already present on the virtual machine. Let's look at question number 5. You deploy several virtual machines to Azure. You are responsible for backing up all data processed by the VMs. In the event of a failure, you need to restore the data as quickly as possible. Which of these options would you recommend to restore a database used for development on the disk data? You just need to select one. So if your machines are deployed in Azure, so the correct answer is Azure Virtual Machine Backup. Use the Azure Backup to restore VM to a specific point in time and to restore individual files. Azure Backup supports application consistent backup for both Windows and Linux VMs. Let's look at question number 7. Your organization needs a way to create application-aware snapshots and backup Linux virtual machines and VMware virtual machines. You have files, folders, volumes, and workloads to protect. You recommend which of these following solutions? Select one. So it is definitely not Azure Backup Mars Agent or Snapshot or Enable Backup for individual Azure VMs. So the correct answer is Azure Backup Server. Azure Backup Server provides app-aware snapshot, support for Linux virtual machine, and VMware virtual machines. And the Azure Backup Server can protect files, folders, volumes, and workloads. You plan to use virtual machine soft delete. Which of the following statements are true? And we need to select 2. I'm going to read out these statements to see if that statement is true. Soft delete provides 20 days extended retention of period. Definitely not. If you delete a backup, soft delete will still provide recovery of data. Absolutely correct. That is the whole purpose of soft delete. And soft delete is built-in protection at no additional cost. Again, absolutely correct. If you delete a backup, soft delete still provides recovery of data, and soft delete is built-in protection at no additional cost.
This is the last module, and in this section we are going to go through monitoring review questions.
Your organization has a very large web farm with more than 100 virtual machines. You would like to use log analytics to ensure these machines are responding to requests. You plan to automate the process, so you create a search query. You begin the query by identifying the source table. Which source table do you use? And you need to select one answer. The right answer is heartbeat. The heartbeat table will help you identify computers that haven't had a heartbeat in a specific time frame. For example, the last 6 hours. Your organization has an app that is used across the business. The performance of this app is critical to the day-by-day operations. Because the app is so important, 4 IT administrators have been identified to address any issues. You have configured an alert and need to ensure the administrators are notified if there is a problem. In which area of the portal will you provide the administrator email address? Select one. So we have learned about this when we were configuring the action group. So if you remember, while configuring the action group, we learned about adding options like email, SMS, push notification, etc. So the correct answer is action group. When creating the alert, you will select email as the action type. You will then be able to provide the administrator email address as part of the action group. Let's look at question number 3. Your organization has several Linux virtual machines. You would like to use log analytics to retrieve error messages for these machines. You plan to automate the process. So you create a search query. You begin the query by identifying the source table. Which source table do you use? When we were learning about log analytics, we talked about it. The source table what we use is syslog. Syslog is an event logging protocol that is common to Linux. Syslog includes information such as error messages. You are analyzing the company virtual network and think it would helpful to get a visual representation of networking elements. Which feature can you use? Select one. There is only one service can give out this solution. That is called Network Watcher Topology. The Network Watcher Topology feature provides a visual representation of your networking elements. Let's explore question number 5. Your company has a website and users are reporting connectivity errors and timeouts. You suspect that a security rule may be blocking traffic to or from one of the virtual machines. You need to quickly troubleshoot the problem. So you do which of the following? So we need to read out the sentence and figure out what would be the solution you would implement. Is it configuring IIS logging and review the connection errors? Definitely not. Does turning on virtual machine diagnostic logging and use log analytics is going to resolve the problem? No. Using Network Watcher, VPN diagnostics feature? We need to use Network Watcher, but not the VPN diagnostic feature. So the correct answer is use Network Watcher IP flow verify feature. Diagnosing connectivity issues is ideal for Network Watcher IP flow verify feature. The IP flow verify capability enables you to specify a source and destination IP version 4 address, port, protocol, and traffic direction. IP flow verify then tests the communication and informs you if the connection succeeds or fails. Question number 6. You are interested in finding a single tool to help identify high VM CPU utilization, DNS resolution failures, firewall rules that are blocking traffic, and misconfigured routes. Which tool can you use? The correct tool is Network Watcher Connection Troubleshoot. Azure Network Watcher Connection Troubleshoot is a more recent addition to Network Watcher suite of networking tools and capabilities. Connection Troubleshoot enables you to troubleshoot network performance and connectivity issues in Azure. Let's look at question number 7. You are reviewing the alerts page and notice an alert has been acknowledged. What does this mean? Select one. Does it mean that the issue has been detected and has not yet been received? Definitely not. Does it mean that an administrator has reviewed the alert and started working on it? Absolutely correct. An alert status of acknowledged means an administrator has received the alert and started working on it. The alert state is different and independent of monitor condition. Alert state is set by the user. Monitor condition is set by the system. Let's look at the last question. You need to determine who deleted a network security group through Resource Manager. You are viewing the activity log when another Azure administrator says you should use this event category to narrow your search. Select one. Which event category is that? The correct answer is administrative. Administrative category contains the record of all create, update, delete, and action operations performed through Resource Manager. Examples of types of events you would observe in this category include create virtual machine and delete virtual network group. The administrative category also include any changes to the role-based access control in a subscription.
I hope you found the information provided in this course super helpful. I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care.